You are listening to the Break Time Tech Talks podcast, a bite-sized tech podcast for busy developers, where we'll briefly cover technical topics, news snippets, and more in short time blocks. I'm your host, Jennifer Reif, an avid developer and problem solver with special interest in data, learning, and all things technology. When I started planning for this episode, I was afraid that I wouldn't have much to talk about, but here I am with what is looking like a full episode. An added bonus of documenting my week through this podcast is that I actually sit down and realize the things that I accomplish or even just chipped in on during the week. I've noticed a common pattern while building code samples with large language models for the book, and I also have a consistent part of my workflow where AI shortcuts my efforts. I have a few other projects I am juggling that I'll mention, and then I found a relevant article that frames efforts around technical learning, mentoring, and work in the current industry. Grab a cup of your favorite beverage, or at least get settled in for a few minutes, and I'll fill you in. Starting us off, I have been working on the book still, and that's a common theme that's been coming up if you've been listening to the podcast for weeks or months now. So if you're not familiar, it's an AI-focused Java book. And I'm working with a large language model in order to help build some of the code samples. As I'm assembling the prompts, I'm testing those prompts multiple times, usually maybe with some tweaks. And sometimes I just want to adjust my wording to make it a little bit more clear, either to the reader, or I don't want to give too much context or too little context in the way that I construct the prompt. Or sometimes I also want to direct the LLM correctly or make the syntax a bit more clear to the large language model. So I will back out the changes and run things multiple times. Now, early on, several weeks, months ago, I noticed that this was rather challenging. You would get in these inevitable loops that the large language model would kind of get stuck in, your coding chat. It would kind of get stuck, and the more you would iterate, the more you would try to fix things or try again or get it to do something it had generated before, but you'd backed out, the more it would just spiral and dig the hole worse. Often you would have to clean everything completely out. You'd have to close the entire application down, try to let it clear its context a bit, and then come back and reapproach it. Not only was your brain a little bit fresher and coming from a different perspective, but the large language model also kind of cleared some of that looping context out a bit. And then things would go usually a little bit better. I have noticed that inevitably, as you run something multiple times, the code that gets generated slightly alters each time that you run that same prompt. So if you have something, you remove the changes, you tweak the prompt a little bit, you run it again. Even if the output should be pretty consistent, it's almost like it thinks that, oh, well, she didn't like the code written this way. Maybe she wanted it written this way instead. And so very minor tweaks, like syntax squabbles, really, of maybe I need to add this extra variable here, or maybe the print statement should be more like this, or maybe she wants a for loop versus something else. Who knows? This can be really nice when I'm looking for something specific and the initial run or two isn't getting me there. But this can also be a bit annoying when the initial code is exactly how I would write it and what I wanted. I just want to verify a tweak in the prompt doesn't change that output too much. And so then you're left with, actually, I liked the way it was generated the first time around, but now if I tweak this prompt just a little bit to make the prompt better, now I'm getting slightly altered syntax, even though they practically do the same thing. It's almost like it just has changed very minor things. Another nice feature, at least in Copilot right now, is that I can restore at a specific checkpoint, which I'm guessing under the hood is like chopping the memory and the code back to a certain spot. This has been working really well for regenerating a code example because hopefully, at least in my mind, it clears out the context that can sometimes muddy the large language model's generation capabilities. So restoring from checkpoint is like hitting the back button on your browser or like a go back or undo, where it chops that back and starts fresh at a previous point in time. This can be really helpful when I want to go back to before I even ran a certain prompt and try it fresh with a corrected syntax or an adjusted wording on my part. And hopefully that clears all that out and lets it generate something better, cleaner, maybe the same code that it initially generated, but I had to improve my prompt before it could get there. All right, so that's that one. Another one is that I've found myself defaulting to a specific use of AI in my workflow throughout different tasks. One of the strongest uses where I plug AI in right now is organizing my ideas on something. Through school and throughout training, you might see advice that you brain dump first and then you organize your thoughts after you get them down on paper. You start just brain dumping everything and then you organize those and put those into actual comprehensible thoughts. I've noticed myself doing this with AI, giving a chat model my brain dump and then working back and forth with the chat model to organize those thoughts. When I want to communicate something, whether that's writing or putting together a paragraph, I will brain dump my idea. Here's what I want. Here's the tone. Here's what I'm thinking. How should I structure this? Or what do you think about this? How should I incorporate this thought into this post that I already put together? And it does a pretty good job sorting and organizing through things. And then I can clean that up and fill in the blanks and refine that. I do find that I go back and forth quite a bit, refining those ideas in the chat until I come up with something that I really want. For instance, when I'm trying to outline something, let's take a blog post as an example. I will dump a bunch of ideas. Hey, I want to talk about this thing and that thing. And I really found this perspective on this topic really cool. I want to make sure I plug that in there, and I'll dump all that in and then work through, and it'll take all that information and summarize it and put it together in a structured format. And then I go back and go, I don't really care for this. Let me tweak this. Let me move this around. I'd really like to take this perspective or this angle on this section and so on. And I work through something until I refine that and put together a nice list of ideas or an outline or whatever it happens to be. Then I actually go back and write the content. The chat tools really just help me organize my thoughts better and faster than if I had to do that all by hand, as I used to do when I would write papers and essays and long form communications earlier on in my career and in my studies. To change topics here, I don't really have a pet project right now. And yes, I do currently have a book that I'm writing, which does leave very little room for additional projects. But I have felt like a lot of people have pet projects going on that are really cool and really interesting and they're really excited about. And I just didn't feel like I really had something. I've got this Goodreads project that I've been working on, and there are several more capabilities and features that I really want to add to that I'm starting to get excited about. Again, just finding the time. But this week, I bubbled up another fun idea. I have another personal improvement project that I'm thinking about building. I don't really want to drop any spoilers just yet, but hopefully I will have some time to at least start on a few of the initial steps soon. And at that point, I'm happy to fill you in and give you some more details. They always tell you to build the app that you feel would help yourself out. But I always felt like there was an existing solution for everything, or that I had a decent enough process or set of tools to handle the things that I did. Never really saw a perfect opportunity, but I may have found one as a way to optimize something that I'm working on in daily, monthly, yearly, quarterly life. So I'll fill you in on that soon. The other things that are on my plate, I have Nodes session review, which I wrapped up my piece of that. So some Nodes updates hopefully will be coming soon. I will keep you informed on the next steps and what's going on there. We also have some updates and review coming for the Knowledge Graph ebook. If you're not familiar, I helped co-author an ebook several months ago that was released, but a lot has changed in the last several months. So we're looking at refreshing some of that and getting that up to date and having a launch or a refresh release on that coming soon. I'll keep you informed. And then I have some more short form content coming soon, which I'm kind of excited about. I've always wanted to do a little bit more video work, and this would give me some opportunities to do that. I'm working through drafting some of my ideas right now. I just need to sit down and record and do some post-processing work on those before they will hopefully be ready to go out. The article that I read this week is called Read Less, Steer More by Ez Young. The whole site in general is pretty minimalist. It's a list of blog posts. However, I really thought this article was short and sweet and had a couple of little tidbits that were nice. First is that overall, it talks about the mentoring perspective on how to read code. This person was mentoring some people on how to read code and review the code because we're writing less code by hand, right? We tend to let coding agents do those things. Then we spend more time reviewing, debugging, checking, tweaking code than we do writing all of the code from scratch. The author recommends actually communicating with the large language model to have it justify or explain its code in bits. Now, I find that this is really interesting that this piece is shifting. Before, when I would review code at least, probably others have been in the same boat as well, we might hesitate to ask the original developer questions because we don't want to appear inept or like we don't understand something, or like we're being a bother or questioning the process or over questioning the changes that were made. Sometimes we might ask a question or two, but we don't dig in too deeply. However, with an LLM, that inhibition is much less. And I have found this to be true of myself. When I walk through coding changes or I'm working with a coding agent to build something, I'm much less nervous, or actually not nervous at all, to ask the large language model, hey, what is this thing doing? And why would we use that here? Wouldn't it be better to go about this way? With a human developer, I might not ask those questions, or at least not near as many of them. I thought the recommendation in the article was also good to turn off the auto accept edits and even to write some code by hand, especially when you're starting out. I find this valuable personally when I'm learning something brand new and I really want to know and understand the ins and outs of it. Something that is a one-off project, maybe it's just like a hack together, get me someplace really quickly, then I might not care as much. But if I'm trying to learn something specific about how an integration works or how something in Java works, I'm much more interested in learning the foundations and understanding what's going in and how it's working. When you are learning something, it can be extremely beneficial to do it by hand once or a few times until you get the feel of it. As an example, when I was learning an instrument growing up, I would practice something new very slowly. And if it was really complicated, I would break it apart and focus on the form in this way, and then the tone, and then moving in a specific way to get this particular sound. And you assemble all those pieces together, and eventually you can play it fast without thinking. But if you dive right into something new and you expect to be able to play it like a professional performing on stage, you're just not going to get there. It's the same thing with coding. You don't necessarily want to dive in and use a coding agent to build something from scratch right out of the gate. If you really want to understand those specific pieces of whatever you're working on or the technologies you're using, then you need to build some of those pieces by hand, or at least some lines of it, to understand how all that fits together. I thought of this analogy. Maybe agents are like riding a bike. You have to practice with training wheels. Now kids are often using balance bikes first, and then you graduate on up to using a bike with pedals and brakes, and maybe you start working on tricks, but you can't start there. This also encourages me because my recent GraphRag training still focuses on the inner workings of how retrieval augmented generation works. So it starts with very manual, here's how this is working under the hood, even though there are lots of nice abstractions on top that simplify the interactions. I wondered if that was still valuable because I just gave that training a week or two ago. And I really thought hard about, do I want to shift the way that I workshop this? Is this hands-on, down in the weeds code still valuable, since many people are now working with far more complex architectures, things like agents and MCP and memory and all sorts of other things. However, I do find it incredibly valuable to back up and learn those building blocks, and then you can build the skyscraper. And this article reminded me of that. I really enjoyed this. I hope you get some value out of this too. This week, I picked up some recurring themes. AI can get stuck in a tweaking loop when faced with repetitive prompt testing, but there are a couple of tools to handle that. I also turned to chat models to organize my thoughts. Finally, I read a short article that gave me a good perspective on how learning and mentoring is shifting. The weight of coding skills might be less, but the article gave some insight into how we review code. Thanks for listening and happy coding.